talk about generative AI and transforming your content supply chain to transform your marketing. So, Clive, I thought I'd start with you. And obviously, marketers have a lot on their plate right now. Just adding another technology to the stack can be challenging both for them and IT organizations. So, what are some of the challenges and benefits you're seeing? Marketers wanting to start to transform their content supply chain in a more scalable way?
Good question, Paul. I'll start with the point that you just made, in that it was already challenging to evaluate all the marketing applications that are available to brand marketers, to experience makers, to deliver on promises to their clients. But then you add in generative AI, and not just the foundation models, you add in a tool economy that's really growing fast. And as a CMO, as a brand manager, I've got to evaluate this entire stack. It's a lot of work, and it means bringing in new expertise, uptraining some of the people on the team so that they can speak the new language around generative AI. And that's a real challenge, and that challenge needs to be addressed before we can go into full scale with some of these technologies. But the opportunity is also there. Some of it, was in that great video. I guess, Jerry, I got to give you credit for that, putting that together for our partnership.
I did it all myself. So.
Yeah.
You didn't use generative AI to create that video?
I hope you delivered all those results with a team. So those are the opportunities, right? The opportunity is to move faster, to deliver more diverse mock-ups to the team for review and approval, and to have the systems in place to do appropriate review and approval. In a lot of ways, generative AI for content, for creative and marketing, it means more. It means more content to deliver into this personalization channel. But it doesn't just happen. It has to be orchestrated. And when you get that right, you're moving faster, you're converting at higher rates based on some of the statistics you saw there.
When we think about, you have a product called Gen Studio. And, again, there's an entire kind of marketing ecosystem and workflows that involve both agencies, brand marketers, many different personas within a large, either as a performance marketer or even a brand marketer. So how does a Gen Studio kind of integrate into that system to allow them to get more value out of their creative investments?
Paul, we're doing a lot in this area, right? We've got a mantra at Adobe. We like to say, we're going from toys to tools. What that means is, with the generative AI models that you're familiar with, and we've all used ChatGPT by now, these things are cool, and they can deliver outputs, and some of that stuff you can use or integrate into your content supply chain, your workflow for creative. But it's really time to get serious, and what we're doing at Adobe is we're focusing on the end-to-end workflow of creativity. And we were there before the ChatGPT moment. But with Firefly and with the models that are now available for us to develop around and to develop responsibly around. So I talked a little bit earlier about the review and approval process. Our Gen Studio product focuses on brand-approved creative. In the product, we're going to be announcing a new version of what we call Gen Studio at Adobe in a few days at Adobe Max, but I'll give you a little bit of a preview now, and that is with Gen Studio for performance marketers, we're going to be helping the brand tune the models that generate their content to their brand guidelines. You'll be able to upload these brand guidelines into the tool and begin your prompt and your creation process from there. So at the beginning, the creativity is tuned to your brand voice. That means copy and that means imagery. And after the output, there's still work to be done with review, approval, and making sure that you have the variations necessary to reach the different segments that you think about for personalization strategies. That's end-to-end, and that's how we think about Gen Studio at Adobe.
Yeah, I think a kind of full life cycle from ideation to planning to generating the content to proving the content, measurement as well. So it's kind of like closed loop marketing. So it's not, I think a lot of the misconception around Gen AI is just because you can generate more content. Doesn't mean you're generating the right content. Doesn't mean it's the right approved content. And so brand safety, ensuring that you're leveraging your brand guidelines, your visual identity system, your brand voice, those are all critical to a brand. I think the other thing, Clive, when you talk about training your model on approved assets, assets that you have the rights to use, because you have to manage, the rights to use content within certain markets, certain countries, and that's something that Gen AI isn't going to do out of the box.
Absolutely. The first iterations of these models, they took a approach to training the models that was broad and leveraged the entire internet. At Adobe, we took a more focused approach. We feel like we pioneered the concept of responsible AI and ethical AI practices. So for our model, the Firefly model family, we focused on training those models on content that we explicitly have permission from creators to train those models around. And for the creators that are using Adobe tools like Adobe Stock, we've been paying them, when derivative assets are created by these models based on their creative work. And we think that should be an industry standard, and we're out there really loud talking about this concept of ethical AI. The trustworthiness of the model is the beginning point for Adobe, but the creative also has to be good. So we've gone from Firefly Model 1 to 2 to 3. I've seen Model 4. It's not yet launched, but it's getting faster, and the fidelity is getting more impressive. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, is what are you seeing in terms of the next set of enhancements and advancements in Gen AI? Obviously, multi-mix models that can generate both text, image, video. Things are getting very specialized, but then also the marketer doesn't want to have to select from 4 or 5 different models to use.
Yeah, I think brands, especially the conglomerates that we work with in our large enterprise business, I think they want to go to a single trusted source to execute campaigns across modalities. Firefly, the way you may think about it today, is a model that generates high-quality 2D imagery. If you've seen what we're doing with video, what we'll be launching next week at Max, we think we're on the forefront with video also, so we'll be talking loudly about that. We're making some announcements around audio. We're also making announcements around 3D. So the idea is you start with trusted model, you start with trusted training practices, you respect the creators, and now we're moving into this mode of multimodality. In order to execute across channel, right, you need the modalities to do so. So that's been our focus this year. You'll hear more next week at Adobe Max.
That's exciting. Maybe you talk a little bit about Adobe Max for the folks that may or may not be familiar with your event in Miami next week.
Yeah. Before I talk about Max in Miami, I just want to. We all anticipated a big storm in Florida this year. We were all monitoring it at Adobe, so condolences for anyone whose family was displaced or impacted. It's great that it wasn't as damaging as we all anticipated. So Adobe Max is the largest creator conference in the world. For the last half a decade or so, we've hosted it in Los Angeles. This year we'll be hosting it at the Miami Convention Center, starting on Monday and ending on Monday the 14th of October and Wednesday the 16th. And we host the greatest creators in the world, celebrities, people who are using our tools to deliver on behalf of brands, or just as consumers leveraging our tools to communicate more effectively socially. And when we land at Adobe Max next week, we're going to be making as much of a splash as we can with this generative AI theme. Because again, we feel a sense of responsibility to guide the discourse, the conversation around these models, and the tools that get developed around the models. Because the models themselves are not ready for prime time. But the tools that get developed around these models should be done so responsibly, and on top of models that are trustable.
Yeah, that kind of leads into it. It's great to create 300 variations of content, both copy, images, video. But ultimately, it's really about the experience. And how can you then leverage that content to create a more personalized experience, across whatever channel that marketer's using, whether it's paid, earned, or owned?
Yeah, I think we rely on partners like Deloitte and the community of agencies that are connected to the Adobe ecosystem to deliver on creativity, whether that's through the advertising channel or the digital experience channel or even the experiential channel. Paul, we're going to get a firefly image behind us next year when we do this. But
Well, I'm on an animated one as well.
it's not out of reach. But creativity at Adobe happens to serve personalization, right? So we're doing creativity, but what we're doing is we're handing the marketer the tool to deliver the right piece of creative to the right audience member or to the right segment. And with these new tools, we can do more, and what we suggest marketers do is start to think about those moments, those content moments that might have been out of reach because of speed to execution or complexity to execution. With generative AI and with the Firefly tools in Adobe Gen Studio, those moments are now in reach. So we can do more and we can aim at finer segments.
Can you give us maybe an example of a brand that you work with that's starting to leverage these kind of transform their content supply chain using some of the Adobe products? Maybe a real world kind of example.
Sure. My favorite brand to talk about with these tools is actually the Adobe marketing organization. And I've got a story about Adobe, and then we'll go to a brand that's outside of Adobe, right? So for a recent holiday moment, right, we went about creating 52,000 variations of a single campaign in 5 days using our own portfolio of tools. Our customer zero for these solutions that we're presenting to our customers is our own consumer marketing organization. We did that in 5 days, 21 assets per hour, and that's just revolutionary. It really changes how we've been thinking at Adobe, how to execute around holidays, events, and so forth. External to Adobe, we've done some really cool things in the CPG space. The Pepsi story is one of my favorites. Adobe partnered with one of our agency partners to deliver this unique campaign where a consumer could use our generative AI tools properly tuned on the brand's voice and creative style to design their own bottles from a prompt. So every consumer that hit this microsite got a unique output based on what their prompt was. This campaign went live. The brand is called Mirinda. It's in Latin America, but it's a scaled deployment, right? Because the models are trustable, they can go forward without concerns around copyright. So that's one of my favorite examples.
Yeah, user-generated content. We actually just recently did one for Formula One where we allowed consumers to create their own Formula One trophy for the Montreal Formula One race because AWS is a Formula One sponsor. So they were able to kind of experiment with creating the different trophies, and then we actually gave that trophy out at the Formula One race in Montreal. So those are always kind of very interesting. I like CPG brands like to experiment with those promotions. So that kind of leads me, Jerry, to a question for you from Deloitte perspective. When you think about, you provide a lot of advisory and consulting to your clients, and how are they thinking about where they should make these investments, and what's the return on investment for Gen AI? How big should they go? Should they, think big, start small, start big, and try to make a huge transformation? But if you can comment a little bit about that.
Sure. I just want to make sure everybody understands, I am completely out of my element here. I am a plumber, right? That is the job I do, and you build the beautiful houses, I'm the plumber. I'm the guy that comes in and makes sure it all runs right behind the scenes the right way. So from an architect perspective, and what I do specifically is I have to think about the terabytes of data that are required to fuel these. I have to think about the optimization of 10,000 people doing the same process over and over again. I have to think about millions of people accessing this, right, from external places around the globe. So when we think about the way companies are trying to experience with Gen AI, what we're seeing is a lot of people doing a lot of kick the tires, I think, as you mentioned, a lot of POCs, a lot of trying of tools and capabilities that such like Adobe offers. But there's a big gap, right, that goes from how we would use it in large-scale production. None of our customers, I mean, we work with some of the largest brands in the world, none of our customers are looking for 80 to 90% accuracy. That's just not acceptable, right? They're looking for 99.99, and then that 99th one, right, 900, that ... 9 that they want to catch, right, are the ones they want to know about in real time. So when we talk about the ability to get to trust and accuracy of Gen AI tools, we're seeing more back office, more supportive and assistive type of applications that are being built. Think about how you fuel a call center. Think about how you fuel marketing to create the 20 versions, right, of assets and copy that you want to have with human interaction to review and take it down. The refinement of these Gen AI models are to be assistive, not to be automated, right, in the current applications that we see. So all of the, like Clive mentioned, like the creation of models and the update and accuracy of these models, even if you look at where ChatGPT and some of these others, right, they are being trained in history, not in real time. So the models that are being transformed have to be trained and put in a position to respond, but they're always inaccurate because the accuracy is always from the last set of training you gave it. So compute power and the overall way that these things are going to work think about it as an autonomous world going forward, there's a big leap of compute and a cost of compute that has to drag down dramatically to make it where these things are going to work in a way that, as I said, are going to be autonomous and in real time.
So when you're thinking about scalability and kind of where the marketers probably not thinking about all those things, right? They're probably working their IT organization or their agency and about how they can scale this.
Yep.
But they're starting probably more like with the proof of concepts, right?
Proof of concepts, and as I said, the way, like if you just take a Firefly example, right, to create creative, the amount of content that you need to train it on to then get it to the point where you can prompt it correctly to produce the type of output that may be complementary to what your creative team could have been building in a tenth of the time, there's a long road to get just to that first point of reference. Then it starts to grow from there. So these things are sometimes months in the works to get to the point where you're comfortable with it, that it's actually going to produce the type of assets that you want to have promote your type of brand voice, right? As you guys mentioned, that's the term, right? I thought. So, but
I know you're the architect. You're not the visual. You're not the creative director.
You have to think in the scale that it requires, right? So. In using this, like we have a complementary tool that Gen Studio is called Creative Edge, and Creative Edge is designed really more on the content optimization, the compliance and coordination of all of the monitoring that goes into how you're going to do this, the emulation of business process that's going to enable for, as you set these things up, as you get to, here's the type of creative brief that's going to automate into the type of creative campaigns I want across multiple channels, and put all that in a position where it can streamline that whole process and go from 1 or 2 a week to 10 to 20 a week. That's the kind of stuff that we focus on, which is helping organizations model those processes, how we optimize, and then how do we scale. And the scale is where the Gen AI comes in. The first 2 steps you have to do as a part of the documentation, the change management, the structure you're going to have to get to make sure that you can build accuracy on the back end requires you to know, right, how those processes and optimized processes can work properly.
And I think the other thing is that if you're a large brand marketer, performance marketer, you're in multiple countries, you've got multiple brands, you've got multiple agencies. Each brand marketer has their own set of campaigns, their own visual identity system potentially. So that's a lot of variables to work with. And so in terms of working with your customers and clients, is it working with their agencies as well as working with the brand marketer and their IT organization to help orchestrate these workflows?
100%. But the agency side, we sit kind of in the middle to be the cohesive tissue kind of reference. So when we talk about content supply chain as a system, it's usually 2, 3, 4 different systems that are integrated together. There's a process flow and a process management that's brought into that. And then there's injection points of either AI, or generative, or types of inputs that come from third parties like agencies, and all of that needs to be put together so that you move that speed of efficiency past where you are today. Like, content supply chain is designed to make content, but it's also designed to emulate the process as much as possible so that the content process is streamlined. Generative now adds to it and then takes it another level 10 up.
So yeah, I want to add
doing
a
a proof
little
of concept, would you want to proof of concept the process as well as just creating the content?
Everyone has a process today. Like, they create content. Like, we're not recreating something. It's not like we come in and say, oh, you should do it somewhere completely different. We take and model that process and then emulate it for optimization. So you can take it and do, we have various modeling tools. We're using Gen AI to understand how those processes are working, where there might be friction, how can you streamline those processes, and then from there, once you kind of come up, you need a change management. How are we gonna optimize that to get it to a point? You can't scale something that's not optimized. I mean, a bad process is still a bad process 10x. It doesn't matter if you're just making it faster. So there's a really important part.
The tool's not going to fix that broken process.
The tool's not going to fix it. You have to take the time to think through that. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this path of conversation, right? So at Adobe, we do spend a lot of time talking about the front end, and we're closer to the brand marketer. But if you are a brand marketer in this room or you're with the agency, that's where our partnership comes in. AWS, Deloitte, and Adobe, we're working with your agency partners today to establish these new versions of content supply chains. And we're working with Deloitte to establish their content supply chain inside of their services organization for when they're doing creative work. Yeah. So if you're a brand marketer here in this room, I think the question is, where are you in this transformation of the back end? And then what are the trusted tools, right, that are available to you to start to experiment with, new forms of, creativity, endpoints to the content supply chain, where the brand marketer comes in. So I just wanted to add to that, Jerry, that you're doing the back end work, we're doing the front end work.
Yeah, it's a great partnership.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have a unique
and they're
job.
Building all their models on AWS, by the way.
Yeah, I have a unique job because
we're doing it on Paul's cloud.
Internally, I own the Adobe stack. So at Deloitte, we're 440-something thousand employees. We're the largest private professional service company in the world. We have 149 different offices, firms that we call them, in every country in the world. And we have a web stack and a marketing stack that is used from Adobe, fully architected to handle all of that unique content and information. We use AEP to process and pull together all of the information, leads, and everything that goes into how we communicate and segment all those customers. We use analytics and CJO and all those tools, plus Target, to personalize and position what is our message, in the marketplace. So, to be honest, I don't care what it looks like. I have to make sure that it all works properly. So these partnerships and how we use these tools, it's important not just that we know how to use them, but we actually have to know how to make them work at their optimal level. And then we work with Adobe. One of the other jobs I have is I work with Adobe and AWS in between how we're building and creating our AWS-based Adobe products. So there's opportunities for how these products run and work. Like, we were a launch partner with Bedrock. So Deloitte and AWS launched Bedrock. We brought, 1,200 or 1,500 people to manually train Bedrock and build all of that. So with that, we're now bringing that into the own your own model kind of approach for how Bedrock can work in concert with AEP data and how all this moves forward. So we're trying to build and fuse what is a better componentized world of the MarTech stack on AWS with Adobe so that it has a very powerful place in the marketplace.
You want to do a 30-second commercial on Bedrock?
Yeah, okay. I probably have to describe what Bedrock is. So,
sorry.
So just a real quick, what we talked about, this idea of a composable MarTech stack. You want to use best of cloud, best of SaaS solutions from Adobe. You want to work with your agency partner. You want to work with your consulting partner like Deloitte. And so essentially what we're doing is building infrastructure services that allow them to create this more composable architecture. So you can pick the best of class model that you want to use. You want to use Firefly? Awesome. You want to use AEM or AEP? Great. That's all running in the cloud. And so this idea of better data interoperability, better machine learning interoperability gives you a choice as a marketer. It's also going to give your IT department, they're going to feel more comfortable if you're using cloud services that are highly scalable, especially if you're a global company and you've got multiple, Adobe instances all over the world, and you've got to be able to integrate those, and you can't do a one-off solution in every country. So this idea that you can build scalable solutions in the cloud that integrate with your best partners is really we want to democratize AI and ML, and for all of our customers and all of our partners, like the Adobes and the partners like Deloitte.
Yeah, and none of it needs to be restrictive. So that's where how all of these progress. They need to be in a position where the test, try, and promote from a production perspective models. The workbench you use for those kind of scenarios needs to be as fluid and as open as your production models and how they collect data and how they communicate, right, to personalize the experiences. So all of this is resident, right, in Adobe stack, in AWS's stack, and so. Like I said, as the plumber, I just make sure that people know how to use it, how to connect to it, how to make it work at scale, and build out what is the ecosystem of that so that MarTech is composable. It is plug and play. It is coordinated around kind of three main principles of data gravity. You need to have and aggregate how that data is. It needs to be open so that it can be composable and coordinated, right? It needs to be compliant. So marketing systems and marketing communications and all of that, right, needs a compliance and monitoring aspect to keep it in check. And that's an important part of how you build the trust of that solution.
And I think this is kind of like the idea that you can just go out, take an LLM and start generating content in the wild, wild west of the internet. Yeah, you as a marketer, that would keep you up at night. I think it would keep your IT department up at night, and your chief privacy officer would probably be not happy as well. So I think it's really important to it takes a village to go from all the way from strategy to creative to execution to measurement. And it's really a collaborative effort.
The conversation has to start in the front of that. Like, CIOs, CMOs, and chief legal officers of organizations, they have to come together and apply, guardrails and environments, right, to foster these things. Because many times we see, IT organizations, they get worried, so they just shut stuff down. They close down IP addresses. They don't give you access to these LLMs. And so what you're doing is you're just stifling. You're not, you have to create a world that allows innovation to progress. You can't stifle innovation because the outside world's doing it faster than then you're behind.
And I think that's the role of software providers like Adobe, is to take this complicated stack and put it into a customer-facing application that can be easily consumed by non-technologists, right? 100%. And approved by your chief legal officer and your chief data officer, right? So that's the challenge, right, that the enterprise is facing today. Jerry described it really well, and the way we think about it as Adobe is, it's our job to build these applications to solve that challenge and to continue to do so as these models grow in their ability to deliver.
I think the other thing is that, and we talked about it takes a village, because you've got an agency of record. Is it a creative agency? Is it a media agency? Is it a social media agency? You're creating an integrated marketing campaign with your agency. They're going to have to create all the creative assets across all the channels that are part of your integrated marketing campaign. And then to be able to do that, be brand compliant, be able to do it at scale, and then be able to repeat that, and then have it always on. That's not the way it's going to happen. It's going to happen through experimentation and innovation. So the Pepsi example is probably a good example, right? Start with user-generated content. You can do a user-generated content contest. It's a controlled experiment, right? You know what brand assets you're going to use. It's an innovation. So I think a lot of brands are in the experimental phase.
And it was a Gen AI campaign, prompt to image generation, but we had review and approval in place, right? So it was done responsibly.
Okay, I think we're going to open it up to the audience. Questions around Gen AI, Adobe, AWS, everything's fair game.
This is a very informative session. I'm just trying to understand in real terms, like between all the parties involved in supporting a client, right? What are the steps to managing the inventory of content supply chain, right? In the sense that the whole idea is to replace content that's failing fast.
Yeah.
So what are the steps between all these parties?
Yeah, I think when I think about the creative side, the creative production, the content management side of the content supply chain today, to me, it's about the assets that you already have. Can they be repurposed? Can you find them, right? So that's where it begins, but it doesn't have to end there. That content in your asset management libraries can be refreshed. I think this was always true, but with tools like generative fill and generative expand, or just creating new pieces of content that can be layered on top of your existing library of content. So maybe you have images of geographies all over the world, but you're doing something in CPG or automotive, and you want the most recent version of the automobile to show up in that setting. Now you can develop that more seamlessly with these tools and add a fresh perspective, right? Without extensive amounts of time in the studio, meaning you can have lots of permutations.
And we help clients think about, you need a proper taxonomy, you need the proper versioning, you need a proper naming convention, you need proper properties, metadata, and description content that can be indexed properly. You need a way for your digital assets, right, to be hierarchical. And then use, right, that common, right, taxonomy as a way to drive speed. Because if you don't and you require prompting to always have to try and figure it out, it just creates friction in the process. So there's a lot of upfront thinking of if you organize it properly, then how you feed it into these models will help it, right, respond even better. And your prompting then can be very specific to what your source versions are, what the type of fill and generate kind of scenarios are, or even if you're trying to eliminate hallucinations of certain types of things, how do you create the right structure to make sure that those hallucinations are caught the right way that you expect? So you need to train it on the things that are wrong the same way the things that are right.
Yeah, I think one of the big misnomers with generative AI, especially for creative, is that the marketer is going to go to a tool, type in a prompt, and generate the asset. But what we're seeing in the enterprise is that's absolutely not what's happening. The marketer's starting with their existing asset portfolio, or they're going to the studio, again, to take photographs, to take videos, and then they're training out models that can generate permutations from there. It's really an exciting time.
Yeah, I think it's really an interesting challenge because a lot of brands, if you don't have your own digital asset management library and you don't have your own rights management library, and you're managing all these approved assets and where you can use them, what country and what rights you have to them, that is like foundational, right? And now you start generating 300x more assets. You got to catalog all those assets into your digital asset management platform too. So just because you can create all these digital assets doesn't mean you don't have to catalog them. You don't have to classify them. And then in order to be able to match the right content with the right persona, right audience, right, whether it's one-to-one or one-to-many personalization, you need that metadata.
And I'll give you the last piece. If you don't figure out an archive and destroy strategy, you'll crush your system. So if you're creating, right, 10 to 30x content through some great generative process, and then you kill your systems, right, on an ongoing basis, you have to be able to understand, like, what's usable and not, and destroy what's not so that it doesn't clog up the system. So there's a lot of, those are the things that you don't think about. So go ahead.
Let's add product information management to that, right? Because yes, it's another way of understanding how we can monetize all this data. Because there's so much focus, like all the cool and expensive content, but you have to marry, like coming from a CPG world, so I would love to understand how you guys are scaling and ensuring that the product information is also connected. I know there's the right metadata, but there's also the product information that it's purely data and it's another system. So doing the plumbing is awesome, but how are you guys managing to get that down to monetize for especially like CPG world that has so many products, such a large catalog? So tell me more about that.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, we're seeing these technologies land first in these e-commerce workflows, right? So the e-commerce endpoint is one of the channel endpoints for the content supply chain. And it's a great question because we've all heard the wave of information about generative AI, but generative AI is not going to replace your PIM. OpenAI is not going to write, the metadata that's necessary to drive your SEO strategy, for your e-commerce business, right? What generative AI is going to do is generate permutations of imagery, right? If you have a library, a catalog of imagery for your products, going from 2D to 3D to video is going to be a lot easier in the coming months, right? And you'll be able to monitor conversion rates, in the store, based on the type of assets that you deploy into the e-commerce environment. But you're still going to rely on the PIM to deliver accurate product information, that drives through the flow. And I think the point is, these tools are not going to replace all points of your workflow. They're going to need to integrate into your workflow.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Amazon. We have a lot of products in the Amazon marketplace, right? 3 million sellers. How are those sellers using Gen AI to create better product images, better product listings? So Amazon has just released 5 different Gen AI models for sellers that they can use to create better lifestyle images, better product descriptions on their product page. And so making those models available to sellers is not going to replace Seller Central or Vendor Central, but it's going to make them much more effective marketer. They're going to be able to grow their business faster on Amazon. So I think that's like a good example of a large PIM that is available to the whole marketplace to use.
From an enterprise perspective, PIMs are sources of truth. So depending on how deep your PIM goes, right? So how you structure your PIM, if it's starting in the innovation and materials level, if it's coming up to the finished product level, and then how do you syndicate that content to distribute it, right? Those are areas that you have to identify of how deep you want to go to enable that master source. The master source then will help organize everything else that's content related around it. So finished SKUs, right, that go in and come from a PIM, they need to be designated in a way that they're helping to drive efficiency of the overall process. And a lot of this is not an open content. From an enterprise perspective, it needs to be very specific. So we deal with a lot of source of truth and master data references for PIM as the beginning, right, of this, of the raw material reference that comes together. So there's a lot of science and nuance to how you get PIMs to be supportive of an enterprise workflow, but content is always critical to what stage of that. If you're going to go deep, that's great. If you want to be at the end result, but that's how you make that decision and where the PIM
I think it's also like performance marketing versus brand marketing, right? You're a performance marketer, you need a lot of content in order to drive unique imagery for a particular product that you're promoting. Brand marketing is much more higher level, higher funnel marketing. That tends to probably be more video and messaging.
I have a question, Jerry, probably more to you. The plumbing and some great advice on...
See, that sticks, right? Every time I tell you that, it sticks.
It does. On how to prepare your ecosystem, etc. As you work with large brands, what is one challenge that you're consistently coming across that you cannot solve and the brand has to?
I would say the problem is everybody thinks they're unique. The brand is unique. The processes that you use to promote and build that brand are usually 90% overlap. I'll take examples like big pharmaceuticals, right, as an example. They may have 50 or 100 drugs in the marketplace, right? And they all have unique requirements and unique definitions of what information is, how it's regulated, what is the global aspect of that. But everybody has the same challenge. But they all think they need new unique processes. So that kind of alignment around what I would consider to be standardization of workflows, right, is really what we try to help most of these large enterprises with multi-brands try and figure out. Because that's the area that makes it most difficult for them to move innovation forward is they want that little extra nuanced thing. Most of the time, it's not warranted. So there needs to be a way for you to drive efficiency with variation, not to drive variation of every process to get to efficiency.
So there is time for one last question, and I would like to take that last question for you guys. I have noticed that the creative team is a lot more used to workflows than the media team is, for example. And so that's my direct experience, is that there is a kind of mismatch of so much efficiency, but I don't know, I can't even put my finger on it. What is your ecosystem guys doing to mature the media side of things, to report the right results for the right piece of creative, to have a perhaps longer workflow, but that makes ROAS and ROI in general just more measurable?
Yeah, these things have to come together, right? So at Adobe, we talk about the media side of this along the lines of personalization. You may call this programmatic, right? So what we believe is that more content will accelerate personalization initiatives or allow you to deliver more effectively, programmatically, driving up conversions against your goals, right? But in order to actually bring that into fruition, we've got to integrate some of these systems. What we're launching next week, Gen Studio for Performance Marketing, is aimed exactly at this problem. So thank you for asking the question, right? We're not only launching a product here, we're launching a set of partnerships with the largest platforms in the world. You know who they are, the largest platforms that you're doing programmatic buying on today. They'll be integrated into Gen Studio for Performance Marketer on day one, which is Monday, October 14th. Is that a commercial?
Just drop the mic now, please.
Yeah, and these large data sets, especially on the media side and the structure that they bring back, the integration of those responsive references across how imagery and content and the combined messaging. Trust me, I don't write any of this, but I know that we get asked all the time to be able to produce what are models that do predictive analysis against a wide variety of inputs that used to be 30 to 40, now it's 400. And so I think that's where you're seeing a lot of the tools like Adobe has, and what they're bringing back is the ability to take so much more finite data into the models and how they respond, and then that can train and fit back into generative so that it gives it a better prompt or a better position for how you want that next personalized image or personalized content to be driven. So the feedback loop and the regressive training that's associated to this is extremely important, right? It's probably the thing we see clients do the least of, and it's probably the thing that will have the biggest benefit going forward, is how much of that feedback loop can you incorporate into your process, because it will give you the best opportunity to perfect and move your overall processes forward from an efficiency and optimization perspective that much faster.
And I'll just make one more comment on that. I think we're seeing a lot of our customers come to us and saying, we really want to predict what's the best creative that we should create with Gen AI. So how can we predict how many different versions of content that we will need in order to drive the goals that we have? And so building predictive models on top of generative AI that then you can then use to automate is kind of like the next, I think, frontier of Gen AI, is to be able to do that predictive creative intelligence. And I think that's where we're going.
There needs to be, this is not the best term, but it's the only term I know of, is there needs to be bias in these systems to enable what you want for what you're doing. Like, so when you bring
we call that brand voice.
Yeah, so like we think of it, I'm talking in the generative, like inside of these models and the way that the math works, we have to use and structure something that helps set guardrails. And guardrails from compliance and certain things that you don't want it to do, that's easy. But the way that you want to nuance it, right, and nuance bias into how do you get to the better, this is what's going to work because of these other things, in my voice or around my what I'm trying to get out of it, context inside of that bias, inside of the model, inside of the regenerative training against what is the ask and the prompt. There's a lot of trying, right, and a lot of thinking that has to go into how that's going to work. So there's no perfect science for any of this right now, and that's what I think you have to take into consideration, is how are you going to keep yourselves relevant in how you're producing these outputs at scale. That's the hardest part.
Guys, thank you so much for your wisdom, your knowledge. the real, experiences. Round of applause.